Hello everybody. The topic that we are going to discuss today is Federation and Confederation, the case of Canada. What is a federation? A federation is a group of organizations, regions, countries, etc. that have joined together to form a larger organization of government. A federation is a political entity characterized by a union of partially self-governing provinces, states, or other regions under a central federal government. In a federation, the self-governing states of the component states, as well as the division of power between them and the central government, is typically constitutionally entrenched and may not be altered by a unilateral decision of either party, the states, or the federal political body. Alternatively, a federation is a form of government in which sovereign power is formally divided between a central authority and a number of constituent regions so that each region retains some degree of control over its internal affairs. The governmental or constitutional structure found in a federation is known as federalism. What is a confederation? A confederation is a union of sovereign groups or states united for purposes of common action. Usually created by a treaty, confederations of states tend to be established for dealing with critical issues such as defense, foreign affairs, internal trade, or currency, with the general government being required to provide support to all its members. The nature of the relationship among the member states constituting a confederation varies considerably. Likewise, the relationship between the member states and the general government and the distribution of powers among them is variable. Since the member states of a confederation retain their sovereignty, they have an implicit right of secession. Difference between a federation and a confederation. By definition, the difference between a confederation and a federation is that the membership of the member states in a confederation is voluntary, while the membership in a federation is not. Under a confederate arrangement, in contrast with the federal one, the central authority is relatively weak. Decisions made by the general government in a unicameral legislature, a council of the member states, requires subsequent implementation by the member states to take effect. What is federalism? A federal system of government is one in which the decision-making powers are divided by the Constitution between one central or national government and, on the other hand, and a series of regional or state or provincial governments on the other, in such a way that each level is autonomous in its assigned sphere and neither can change the division of powers unilaterally. Federalism is a complex, legalistic, and conscious creation. It may emerge from a voluntary compact between states that have previously led separate lives for a number of years. Such has been the United States Federation. It was created by representatives of 13 states who met in Philadelphia in 1787. Canadian Federation was also influenced by the American experience. Federation provides the framework in which unity and diversity can coexist. Thus, people who differ by descent, language, and culture can seek the advantages of a common membership of a federation. On the other hand, hostility to or fear of common enemy and the need for a common defense may produce the desire among states to unite in a federation. The desire for economic expansion and development may also be a motivating factor. Characteristics of a federal form of government. All federal states possess certain basic characteristics which distinguish them from unitary states. These are dual government. A federal system is first characterized by the coexistence of two levels of government, one central or national or federal government and several regional or state or provincial governments. Each layer of government central or state, has constitutional authority to make some decisions independently of the other. Distribution of powers. A written constitution allocates powers to the central and state governments. Matters concerning national interests, such as defense, foreign affairs, immigration, and also some domestic functions such as currency, are the responsibility of the central government. State or provincial governments are given the responsibility of some of the domestic policies such as education, housing, or agriculture. The state governments may also share power with the central government. Supremacy of the Constitution. Since the Federation is a creature of the Constitution, both the central and state governments are subject to and controlled by the Constitution. The Constitution is supreme. Constitutional Court. There must exist a constitutional court to interpret the Constitution and arbitrate disputes between governments in terms of the Constitution. It can declare unconstitutional and hence void any executive or legislative action by the central government or state government which violates the provisions of the Constitution. A bicameral legislature. A bicameral assembly is needed to ensure representation in the national legislature for the states, provinces, or republics which make up the federation. The history of Canada. In Canada, the word Confederation refers to the process or event of establishing or joining the Canadian federal state. In modern terminology, Canada is a federation, not a confederation. Canadian Confederation generally refers to the Constitutional Act of 1867, which formed the Dominion of Canada from three of the colonies of British North America, and to the subsequent incorporation of other colonies and territories. The fundamental basis of federalism in Canada was and remains the need to reconcile, balance, and accommodate diversity. The nature of the relationship among the member states constituting a confederation varies considerably. Likewise, the relationship between the member states and the general government and the distribution of powers among them is variable. Since the member states of a confederation retain their sovereignty, they have an implicit right to secession. Canada is a country in the northern part of North America. Its 10 provinces and 3 territories extend from the Atlantic to the Pacific and northward into the Arctic Ocean. In 1867, Canadian Confederation, 3 provinces of British North America, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and the province of Canada were united to form a federated colony, becoming a sovereign nation in the next century. Canada is a federation and not a confederate association of sovereign states, which is what confederation means in the contemporary political theory. It is nevertheless often considered to be among the world's more decentralized federations. Canada is the second largest country in the world and occupies most of the northern part of North America. It is rich in natural resources. The first Europeans who reached the coast of the present-day Canada are the Vikings. The land of the present-day Canada became forgotten until the end of the 15th century. Henry VII patrons the mission across the Atlantic which John Cabot leads. A bit later, Jacques Cartier, a Frenchman, initiates 2 expeditions. During these expeditions, the territories being colonized by the French start to be called Canada because during this expedition, a local native guiding the French pointed his finger towards the villages and said Kanata, which meant villages. With the arrival of the 18th century, the French control of Canada starts to weaken. After the War of the Spanish Succession, France is forced to acknowledge the British control over the Hudson Bay and Newfoundland. The UK expands its possessions. Up until the middle of the 18th century, the tensions between the two powers went on rising to be finally decided during the 7 Years' War. France loses the war and then the Treaty of Paris is forced to give up all their territories in Canada to the British. Canada becomes British. However, the French population remains a formidable power. In the meanwhile, the American Revolution breaks out and the colonists from South Hope that the Canadians will join them in a joint fight against the Crown. However, their hopes are futile as the Canadians are tired of war. Their prosperity depended on the exports to Britain. The Americans are defeated and retreat. America again attacks Canada. The US Army retreats again. Canada wants to overthrow the British and establish republic. Reforms in Canada begin leading to autonomy. Canada finally gains full democratic self-government. Canadian federalism. It is of the essence of a federal state that power and resources are shared between governments. Compared with a unitary form of government, federalism stresses differences and diversity. In contrast with full independence of constituent members, it emphasizes communality of interests and reflects a collective preference to live together in spite of differences. Canada is variously described as multicultural, multilingual, multi-ethnic, and multinational. Canada is a federation with 11 components, the national government of Canada and 10 provinces. All the 11 governments derive their authority from the Constitution of Canada. There are also 3 territorial governments in the far north which exercise powers delegated by the federal parliament and municipal governments which exercise powers delegated by the province or territory. Canada is a federation with a strong centre wherein residuary powers lie with the centre. The Constitution Act 1867 outlines specific powers and jurisdictions for each of these levels of government, such as what public policy fields may legislate in, as well as how each level of government may raise revenue. There have been several constitutional amendments that have had significant consequences for Canada's federal system. For example, the Constitution Act of 1930 transferred ownership of natural resources in Western Canada from the federal government to the western provinces. Constitutional monarchy is the central component of Canada's constitutional framework. The British Queen is the formal head of the state. The Constitutional Act of 1867 states that the executive government and authority in Canada is vested in the Canadian monarchy, which Canada shares with Great Britain and some other former British colonies. However, while the written constitution explicitly places the executive authority in the hands of the monarch and his or her representatives, the unwritten constitutional convention holds that this authority is actually exercised by the Prime Minister and his or her cabinet. The Supreme Court of Canada is the highest court and final authority on civil, criminal, and constitutional matters. Each province operates its own individual court system. The country's legal system is based mainly on English common law, but in the province of Quebec, it is modeled on French civil law. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is a Bill of Rights entrenched in the Constitution of Canada, which forms the first part of the Constitution Act 1982. The Charter guarantees certain political rights to Canadian citizens and civil rights of everyone in Canada. The Canadian Constitution also provides for a parliamentary system of government. It established a federal parliament consisting of the monarchy and 2 legislative chambers, the House of Commons or the lower house and the Senate or the upper house. The Act further states that the powers and authority of these legislative chambers are to be modelled upon those found in the British Parliament. In addition to the written provisions of the Act, there also exist several unwritten constitution conventions that are fundamental to the operation of Canada's parliamentary system. Thank you. If you liked this PowerPoint presentation, please subscribe to my channel Takshashila. Thank you so much.